In 2020, while we were all adjusting to being inside way more than usual thanks to the pandemic, there was a small war going on my social media. It started with a fairly innocuous meme. It simply said, normalize not bringing up a relatable story about yourself when someone else is sharing something about themselves, and just listen. And it doesn't seem like something that would cause a fight, but it did. And here's why. Neurodivergent people stepped up and said, hey, this is how we empathize. This is how we show that we can relate and we can understand somebody else's experience. Whereas neurotypical people were like, no, this is how you derail, and this is how you take the attention away from this story that I need to share. And in a way, they were both right, and they were both wrong. What this was the best example of is something called the double empathy problem. The double empathy problem is a term coined by Dr. Damian Milton, and it explains how people from very different worldviews or social backgrounds or social expectations have a hard time communicating with each other, have a hard time empathizing, because to empathize is to relate or to understand. And this is something that is very hard when somebody thinks a very different way than you do. And what happens generally is that we will go, well, I'm not the problem communicator, so it must be their fault, their deficit, their failing. Now, when we look at autism, we are looking at autism from a neurotypical standpoint, and we see it as a medical condition. So autism is a condition. Autism is a disorder. We look for cures, and we look for ways to make autistic people fit into a neurotypical world. That is not working. And with the estimates being that there may be as many as 1 in 50 people with autism in the world today, it is time that we start looking at this from a social point of view. That it is simply a difference. It is a variation of normal. There is a psychologist named Jack Den Houding from Australia who has been studying autism for a while. They were diagnosed at 25 with autism. And one of the things that they have come to understand, at least for them, is that they do not have a disability. As in, disability is not a noun, something that they carry around. Instead, they are disabled by an environment that does not cater to their needs. And so they used an example of shopping malls, how shopping malls are noisy, they are crowded, they have really bright lights, they're chaotic. And because of that, they struggle in those places and they are disabled. Whereas in a shopping center that was perhaps more dimly lit, not as crowded or chaotic, they would have a totally different experience. And that is why they say that disability is a verb, not a noun. One of the things that we say all the time about autistic people and neurodivergent people is that they have communication deficits. There was an author of a paper, her name is Catherine Crompton. Her experiment was done in 2018. The paper was published in 2020. And it is talking about information transfer between autistics. What she did to run this test, and it was have the 3 different groups play the telephone game. If you recall the telephone game from childhood, one person has something whispered in their ear, and then they whisper to the next person, and to the next person, and to the next person. And the idea is, how much has that story or the phrase or whatever changed from that first person till the very end? What was found, because it was 3 groups, one group was completely neurotypical, one group was all autistic, and one group was mixed with half neurotypical, half autistic, and alternated every other person. What they found is that the neurotypical group and the all neurodiverse group lost information at the same exact rate. But when it came to the mixed group, all of a sudden they lost information at a much faster rate. This demonstrates that the issue is not in how autistics communicate or how neurotypicals communicate, but instead how they communicate with each other. We are in a world that is completely catering to a neurotypical experience. And we expect autistic people and other neurodiverse people to fit into our world, to change how they act so they're not weird, so they're not different, to adjust to how we do things when it is a huge change from how their brain works. There's a book called Is That Clear? Effective Communication for a Neurodiverse World. And that book seeks to put some of the responsibility back on neurotypical people for communication, so that maybe neurotypical people can look at different ways to communicate to make things more accessible to neurodiverse people who are already having to adjust so much. As someone who is neurodiverse, I am ADHD. My therapist and my doctor both believe I'm on the spectrum, though I have not finished the full evaluation for it. That is incredibly difficult to navigate. I have struggled with this presentation in particular because some of the things that we are trying to do as part of the presentation are things that do not come natural to me. Eye contact is one. This is attempt number 50. I was been keeping hash marks as I record my attempts at this presentation, and this is number 50 because I notice, and I'm still doing it now, that I have a very hard time keeping my eyes focused on one person or one thing, where that serves me very well when I am giving a talk or a workshop in front of a lot of people. It has definitely been a struggle here where I am looking at a camera and seeing my face back at me. I think what I'm trying to say with all of this is that the double empathy problem is a huge issue, because it is a neurotypical world. And those of us who are neurodiverse have to work so hard at trying to fit in already that putting all the responsibility for changing how we communicate on us as well is simply too hard sometimes. And when we can both sides look at each other and have empathy and make an effort to understand, then the communication is going to come.